A boy wakes up before sunrise. Not because of an alarm. Not because of school. He wakes up because if he doesn't, his family won't drink that day. He runs barefoot to the taps in his neighborhood on the outskirts of Amman, Jordan, opens them as fast as his 10-year-old hands allow, and waits. The city switches the water on for a few hours, once every 2 weeks. Miss it and there is nothing. No water for his parents. No water for his 7 brothers and 2 sisters. No water for the cattle his father keeps for the butcher shop. The boy never misses it. Not once. His name is Omar Yaghi, and decades later, standing in a Frankfurt airport with his phone buzzing in his hand, he would receive a call from Sweden telling him he had just won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for inventing a way to pull water from the air of a desert. The same dry, hostile air that surrounded him as a child. The same air that, according to everything science had ever said, contained almost nothing worth having. That pivot, from a child waiting for water to a Nobel laureate manufacturing it from nothing, is not a metaphor. It is engineering. It is chemistry. And it is one of the most consequential technological stories unfolding on Earth right now, one that began not in a polished laboratory but in a military crisis that most people never heard about, buried inside classified logistics reports from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. During Operations Enduring Freedom and Iraqi Freedom, 10 to 12% of U.S. Marine Corps casualties were attributed not to enemy fire, but to the logistics of moving water and fuel. E-scholarship read that again slowly. Soldiers were dying not in battle, but in the act of delivering water across the desert. Water convoys rolling through insurgent territory were ambushed. Trucks carrying bottles of purified water became military targets. By the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the military was already testing atmospheric water generation at forward operating bases to reduce reliance on water convoys, which were frequent targets of enemy attacks. University of California, Berkeley. The Pentagon was not looking for a miracle. It was looking for a way to cut a supply line that was getting its people killed. Water transport is as mission-critical and as logistically challenging as fuel transport for the U.S. military. Meeting deployed military water needs requires equipment resources, consumes fuel and endangers personnel. Scientific American. The math was brutal. Each warfighter requires approximately 8 liters of water daily, and the reliance on water resupply hampers maneuverability, limits decision-making space, and complicates the logistics of emerging operational concepts. E-scholarship. Every liter of water that had to be trucked into a combat zone was a liability. Every convoy was a target. Every bottle was a strategic vulnerability. The military had built one of the most sophisticated fighting machines in human history, and it was tethered to the nearest water source like an animal to a well. This is where the story takes its first unexpected turn. The solution the Pentagon began chasing was not a new pipeline, not a desalination plant, not a better purification system. The solution it began to fund was something that sounded, at the time, almost delusional: pulling water directly out of the air in one of the driest environments on the planet. The concept of extracting moisture from the atmosphere is ancient. Certain desert beetles in the Namib, one of the driest places on Earth, have evolved textured shells that collect fog droplets and channel them toward their mouths. The Atacama Desert in Chile has indigenous communities that have used fog-catching nets for generations. Even the Star Wars films improbably got something right. The fictional planet of Tatooine had moisture vaporators rising from the sand to harvest the thin humidity of a twin-sun world. The idea had always been there. What had always been missing was the material capable of doing it efficiently enough to matter. Traditional atmospheric water generators work like air conditioners in reverse. They cool air down to its dew point, the temperature at which water vapor condenses into liquid, and collect what drips out. In humid climates this works reasonably well. In a desert at 45 degrees Celsius, it fails completely. The energy required to cool dry, scalding air down to the dew point is enormous. The amount of water produced is negligible. The cutting-edge water production technologies used at the time, such as dehumidifiers, were unsatisfactory in size and power and could not harvest water from areas with low humidity air, like in Kandahar, Afghanistan. Defense 1. The military had tried them. They were impractical. Too heavy, too power-hungry, too dependent on the very infrastructure that didn't exist in a combat-forward operating base. Then came the crystal. In 1995, Omar Yaghi, by then no longer the boy running barefoot to the taps of Amman, but a young chemistry professor at Arizona State University, made a discovery that the scientific establishment considered almost unfeasible. He successfully crystallized metal organic structures in which metal ions are connected by charged organic linkers via strong bonds. This breakthrough led to the development of a new class of materials known as metal-organic frameworks, marking the birth of reticular chemistry. Science Direct. The scientific community's reaction was largely skeptical. What Yaghi had built was too stable, too structured, too deliberately porous. It looked more like molecular architecture than chemistry. He was building scaffolding at a scale measured in nanometers, frameworks so precise they could be designed to trap specific molecules, toxic gases, carbon dioxide, and eventually water vapor. The material he created, metal organic frameworks or MOFs, was almost paradoxically described. Just 1 gram of a water-absorbing MOF has an internal surface area of roughly 7,000 square meters. Army technology. 1 gram. 7,000 square meters. That is a material that is, by any intuitive measure, impossible. A substance mostly made of empty space, engineered at the molecular level to be simultaneously ultralight and structurally permanent, a sponge made of geometry itself. In 1999, Yaghi introduced MOF-5, a breakthrough material that revolutionized materials chemistry. Exceptionally stable and spacious, MOF-5 could withstand heating to 300 degrees Celsius even when empty. What astonished scientists most was its hidden immensity. Just a couple of grams of the material contained a surface area equal to a football pitch. The scientific world began to pay attention. But at this point, Yaghi was still thinking about carbon capture, about hydrogen storage, about the grand abstract problems of atmospheric chemistry. Water was not yet the destination. It would take a different kind of insight to get there. In 2014, in a laboratory at UC Berkeley, something changed. Yaghi's team of researchers had an epiphany. The tiny pores in MOFs could be designed so the material would pull water molecules from the air around them like a sponge, and then with just a little heat, give back that water as if squeezed dry. Army technology. The mechanism was elegant in its simplicity. At night, when desert temperatures drop slightly, a MOF-based device absorbs water vapor into its pores with no energy input at all. Passively, silently, the way a sponge absorbs liquid by contact alone. During the day, when the sun heats the material, the pores release that moisture as vapor, which then condenses into drinkable water. No electricity grid. No refrigeration compressor. No pipeline. Just a crystal, the air, and the sun. Yaghi took his device to the Arizona desert and the Mojave. He wanted to know if the theory worked in the real world in conditions hostile enough to matter. He found that the MOFs could absorb water from the air at relatively high temperatures of 25 Celsius and release it at 45 Celsius. ACS publications. This was a crucial finding. Previous technologies required cooling, which meant energy. Yaghi's system required heating, which in a desert is free, abundant, and relentless. The very thing that made deserts lethal to conventional water systems was the engine that made his system work. The enemy had become the fuel. The United States military was watching. DARPA launched the Atmospheric Water Extraction Program with the goal of providing potable fresh water for a range of military, stabilization, and humanitarian needs through the development of small, lightweight, low-powered, distributable systems that extract potable water from the atmosphere to meet the drinking needs of individuals and groups, even in extremely arid climates. Scientific American. The language in DARPA's official solicitation was unusually candid about the stakes involved. Delivery of bottled water via aircraft and trucks, which the military relies on most heavily, can also be costly and wasteful, and distribution sometimes leads to avoidable casualties. Defense 1. The word, avoidable, carries enormous weight in a military document. Avoidable means preventable. Avoidable means that people were dying for something that a better technology could have stopped. DARPA's Atmospheric Water Extraction Program aims to develop a device that can provide water for 150 soldiers and be carried by 4 people. In February 2021, General Electric was awarded $14 million to continue development of their device. Science Direct. The requirements were extraordinary. A machine capable of sustaining an entire platoon of soldiers, light enough to be moved by 4 people, operating in air with humidity levels as low as those found in Kandahar or the Mojave. And it had to do this using minimal power, because in a forward operating base, power is as scarce and dangerous a resource as water itself. G's team brought in UC Berkeley chemistry professor Omar Yaghi, who had begun experimenting with MOFs in the desert in 2014. His team designed several generations of prototypes employing kilograms of MOFs and showed that water harvesters worked well in some of the driest deserts in the world. CS publications. The program ran on 2 parallel tracks. The stabilization track sought to develop materials to provide water to a 150-person unit. The second track sought to build a canteen-sized air-to-water device for individual soldiers. ACS publications think about what that second track means. A single soldier, carrying a device the size of a water bottle, capable of harvesting drinking water from the air while moving through a desert. Not filtering water. Not purifying river water. Generating water from the atmosphere. The logistics chain, the convoy, the target, the casualty, collapses to nothing. While the military was pushing the technology toward the battlefield, something quieter was happening in parallel. The same material, the same fundamental discovery, was beginning to reveal itself as something far larger than any military application. The number that mattered was not how many soldiers could be hydrated. It was 2 billion. That is the number of people on Earth currently without reliable access to clean drinking water. Not in war zones, not in combat outposts, but in ordinary neighborhoods, cities, and villages across the developing world. And unlike soldiers who could be supplied by the state, these 2 billion people had no convoy coming. No resupply. No classified program with a $14 million budget. They had what surrounded them: air. The United Nations has been warning about water insecurity, or even water bankruptcy, for years. Wikipedia desalination works for coastal cities. It does not work for a village in the Sahel, a community in the high Andean desert, a settlement in the middle of Rajasthan. Those places have no ocean. What they have in common with Kandahar and the Mojave is atmosphere. And atmosphere, as Yaghi's crystals demonstrated, contains water everywhere, even when the human eye sees only dust. Yaghi's drive for this project is deeply personal. Growing up in a refugee community in Jordan, he lived in a home without running water. He often recalls the neighborhood whisper that the water truck had arrived, sparking a frantic rush to fill containers before the supply ran out. Wikipedia, that whisper, that childhood alarm system built from collective desperation, was the original data point. Every scientific paper Yaghi would go on to publish, every MOF he would design, every desert prototype he would test, traces back to that morning sound. The truck is here. Run. Yaghi went on to develop a metal-organic framework that could pull water vapor from the air, even in the desert, even in places where water doesn't come through taps, not even once every 14 days. Jenak, the boy who had run to the taps, had, without quite intending to, made the taps obsolete. In 2020, Yaghi founded a company called Atoko to commercialize the technology. The machine his company developed operates effectively even in areas with less than 20% humidity. About the size of a 20-foot shipping container, these units can be deployed to islands hit by hurricanes or to remote desert villages. Wikipedia. And then the ambition grew. He envisions a future of personalized water. Much like solar panels allow homes to generate their own power, MOF-based devices could eventually enable individual households to produce their own drinking water, thereby ending dependence on centralized, often vulnerable municipal systems. Wikipedia. The phrase personalized water sounds simple. Its implications are civilizational. For most of human history, the location of water has determined the location of civilization. Rivers dictated where cities were built. Aquifers determined which land could be farmed. Wars were fought, and are still being fought, over the right to control a river's flow, a dam's gates, a pipeline's route. The entire geopolitical architecture of the Middle East, Central Asia, and the American Southwest is partly a water map. Ultimately, the technology could even diminish the motivation for conflicts over resources by providing a new source of drinking water to stressed populations, G. Vernova said, DARPA's own program manager, in an official statement. That is an extraordinary claim for a government defense agency to make. That the same technology being developed to free soldiers from supply chains might also, in time, reduce the reason some wars are fought at all. In October 2025, the Nobel Committee in Stockholm called a number in Frankfurt Airport. Omar Yaghi was awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for the development of metal-organic frameworks, porous materials that capture carbon dioxide from the air and harvest water from desert humidity. Defense 1. He shared the prize with Susumu Kitagawa of Kyoto University and Richard Robson of the University of Melbourne. Standing at Frankfurt Airport, phone in one hand and luggage in another, Yaghi's moment signified something important about how knowledge works, that it doesn't always require privilege to pursue and surely doesn't demand any pedigree. It asks only for rigor, curiosity, and the patience to look closely at things. Jenak. Yaghi said the key to the next phase will be using artificial intelligence to find the right combinations of elements. He noted that there are over 70,000 different MOFs being invented so far since they were first pioneered, and that the possibilities of making new ones are endless, an infinite chemistry with infinite materials. ICS publications. The machine learning models being applied to MOF discovery are now scanning a design space so vast that no human team could explore it in a lifetime. Algorithms are doing in hours what bench chemistry would take centuries to attempt. The result is a compounding effect. Each new MOF generation is more efficient, more stable, more targeted than the last. The sponge is getting smarter. The trajectory of this technology follows a pattern that appears repeatedly in the history of human invention. Radar was developed for war and gave rise to the microwave oven. The Internet was ARPANET, a military communications network. GPS was a defense system before it became the invisible infrastructure of every phone, every delivery truck, every lost tourist. The pattern is consistent. Military necessity funds the first generation of a technology too expensive and speculative for the private sector, and then the technology escapes into the world and changes it in ways its original designers never envisioned. Atmospheric water extraction is following the same path. What began as a classified logistics problem, how do we stop killing soldiers by sending them water, has become the foundation of a potential solution to one of the defining crises of the coming century. When asked what he would tell the younger version of himself if he could, Yaghi paused and then smiled, saying that young Omar would think he was being put on, that this was all fictitious and someone was trying to take something from him. Army technology. The child who woke before dawn to catch the city's water before it ran out could not have imagined a world in which the air itself was the reservoir. And yet that is the world being built. One crystal, one pore, 1 gram of surface area at a time. The desert has not changed. It is still merciless, still dry, still indifferent to the survival of anything that enters it without preparation. What has changed is what a human being can bring into it. Not more bottles. Not longer convoys. A device. A material. A structure engineered at a scale invisible to the naked eye, designed by a refugee boy who once ran barefoot to a tap and decided, somewhere in the gap between that moment and the rest of his life, that the problem was not a lack of water. The problem was a lack of imagination about where water could be found. It was in the air the whole time.